Welcome to From the Labs, the Response Labs podcast. My name is Andy Locke. I'm joined by Carie Jones. I head up strategy and data. Carie heads up media. We're going to talk a little bit about paid media as a core capability here at Response Labs and how we got to that point and what it means for our clients and our partners and everyone else. Carie, did I miss anything in the little intro there?
You did not miss anything at all, Andy.
Awesome. So why don't I start with how we got here? Because as a digital agency early on, we actually didn't have a media team. It sort of came naturally. And Carrie's heard this story a million times, so this is really for the benefit of the listener. Response Labs originally began as Congruent Media. It was sort of an extension of ad agencies. That's the kind of the way we positioned ourselves. This is back in the early 2000s into the mid 2000s. And this was a time that ad agencies didn't have interactive teams. So Congruent Media played that role until they were acquired by Havas, and became the CRM and loyalty arm and data arm of Havas for a number of years. At that point, I guess after about 3 years, the leaders of Congruent Media who went to Havas left Havas and started Response Labs. That would be Dan, Jeffrey, and Brian. And I joined them a little bit later. But again, at that point, we were sort of an everything digital agency without a specific media group. Over the years, though, we really focused in on CRM and loyalty programs and being the ad agency for those programs for our clients. And we really did a lot of great things. But one constant always came up, and that was that we were handing off audience lists, or we were passing our thoughts and strategies onto a separate media team that was not us. And so after a few more clients needed those services, we realized that we should build our own media team. And that's sort of how that group came off. Carie, you came in to Response Labs as a media professional, seeing that we were sort of building from the ground up this team. I think we were maybe a year or two in at that point. What made you want to jump into that, into what we were doing? Again, seeing that we were kind of just at the very beginning, and we were really a data CRM loyalty agency with not much media to begin with.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's kind of twofold for me. The first part of it was Response Labs and the depth of knowledge in the data side. So a lot of media agencies were born on media and then data came later and they're trying to configure data, after the fact where the data really started everything. I think one important thing for me, just kind of coming into it, was there's a lot of media agencies, media companies that say, oh, yeah, we use first party data. And, in the past couple of years, it's been even more prevalent with cookies and privacy. And I think it's interesting because even when they say, yeah, we use first party data, when you really dig into it, the first party data that they use and the way they use it is so thin. A media company I worked for many years ago said, oh, we use first party data, but I quickly figured out that it meant they were using like one of the data as first party data and they were just running a lookalike against it without any segmentation or anything like that.
Right.
So there's definitely differences in the first party side. But I think the second piece of it is like there's such a disconnect with clients because they think of new customer acquisition and customer retention, customer loyalty as two separate functions. But really, when you build them together, it just makes each one that much more impactful. And that's something that clients really miss. So I think that part of it for me is such a fun avenue to go down because it's literally putting the Lincoln logs together to make the media strategy more efficient over time, and being able to measure that is fun.
So, what since you've been in this seat now, what have you actually been doing? What have you been doing all this time?
I know. How do I
What
spend my hours? That's a great question. I don't
what
really.
has can you just walk through what you and the team have actually been doing to build out this media capability here at Response Labs and honestly make it one of our strongest departments here in the company?
Yeah, so it's really understanding the depth of the way that we look at the first party data. We look at the existing customers because we can learn so much from them. So we can take your top customers, your customers that are right below that. So it's a champion or a customer that's high value. And we could say, what are the attributes of this group? What makes them a champion for your brand? And understanding that. And then we can take that data and we can layer it into media platforms. And it's not just saying, oh, I'm targeting this person based on where they live, I'm based on their household income, basic demo. It's actually their behavior intent and what drives them, and using that to build our own audiences on the media side. So we can say, Carrie Jones is your top customer. She goes to your restaurant all the time. Here's all of the attributes that she has, and they're very in depth, right? What her brand affinities are, all kinds of different things that make up why she is that person. And then we create 100 more of them, right? So it sounds so simple, but being able to understand the depth of each segmentation and what that means from your existing customers and applying that to media platforms. So it's a
Yeah, I
different
mean, you kind of
strategy.
yeah, you nailed it. I mean, that was the stuff we were handing off before, and I think that's the biggest difference I've seen is by not handing it off, by being able to do all the cool segmentation and really see the value from it. We're actually able to do the type of reporting that we've always wanted to do because we have our team right there. We have access to all the data. Sometimes we would get access, to be able to close a loop or something. But when your own team is running that part of the media mix or the funnel, if you will, we could do a lot more from a reporting and an insights and an analysis perspective about the customer themselves. And that's where I get real excited and nerdy about all the cool things that we do at Response Labs, being able to really pinpoint either specific behaviors or of who we've been targeting. Did that campaign actually drive them to make a purchase? Being able to see that and also see all the different touch points along the way because we also manage the email and sometimes we get those website insights. And so tying it back to the effectiveness of media campaigns, that's the exciting part. And I wouldn't say I didn't envision that that was going to happen anyway, but I think what we've been able to do with it, and fully transparent, what we've been able to do with it with the support of an AI engine, like a Claude, for example, can really, dig deep into a whole lot of data that was sort of just sitting there before. So that's exciting, for me in terms of what we've been able to achieve. Um, but I think also it's you know, not to be all about me and all my excitement, but it's really also about what we're able to bring to the clients, and sort of, you know, bring that level of insight to what they do. I think a lot of times we'd work with marketers and they just didn't have access to certain information, whether it was their agency gatekeeping or their analytics team couldn't get the information quick enough. A marketing team was making decisions just based on a little bit of data or gut, or maybe they were using like email or web behavior to make media decisions. So now we are able to do more. We can provide more. We can, just give a little bit more information to help them make smarter decisions as a partner. Um, are you feeling the same thing? Are you seeing the same thing in the conversations you're having with the client on your side of the business?
Yeah, it's interesting with the clients because they have the metrics that they're used to and the KPIs that you're used to. They're looking at like website traffic, or they're looking at what the revenue was and how it was impactful, but they're not looking at like the life cycle of customer acquisition, what the lifetime value of that customer is. And those are things that are not connected. So a lot of times you'll come in and it's like the right hand isn't talking to the left hand. You have multiple agencies involved. They all have different subsets of data, and you're not able to connect everything and do that closed loop attribution and show here's the new customer acquisition, here's how it continues in the life cycle, here's how we bolster that. So it's great to be able to show the client here's the immediate, here's what we're able to build off of what your data sets to us, and then how we can capitalize that and compound that over time. And so those are the conversations that we have with them now. It's like it's able to dive so much deeper. Not only is about the immediate performance, but it's about performance of the brand and the brand strategy overall. It's the performance of, if you're a multi-unit corporation, what does that impact into that holistic number, and how is it impacting in all these different strategies we've deployed in different areas? And being able to connect that all together to say, here is how that's impacting it on a local level for brand strategy. So that's not data points that you typically see within an agency, but those are the conversations we're able to have. and pull levers accordingly, right? To make changes, to be more efficient, knowing we have a promo, knowing we need to ramp up for seasonal. It helps really drive the strategy in the short and long term.
Yeah, and you kind of noted obviously the customer part of this when we're creating those segments. We like to create that, the profile of the ideal customer, the top customer, and that, as we talked about, that tends to drive some of the audiences that you're using, whether it's directly to those people, but in more cases than not, it's trying to find those that are just like them. But what your data does is it enriches that profile of what a top customer is. It's not just the transactional data. It's not just the email behavior. Now we're able to look at audiences, even if it's a lookalike, and if there's certain traits or behaviors that we're seeing there, or indexes, where they're high or low, we can build those in as signals to again round out that profile, and it becomes almost like a beacon that when people start to hit on some of those signals or hit a certain number of those signals, we can identify them as potentially, not just potentially customers, but potentially top customers. And that's exciting because that's just, again, taking the data we have available to us and building on it and reducing the amount of assumptions that we're making. Um, the the customer, while, there's always a balance, right, in terms of how we're targeting them and the benefit or detriment of giving them what they want. We talk about personalization. Um, we sort of come at it from the perspective of this truly is beneficial to the customer, right?
Hmm.
We're for the purposes of the brand that we represent and getting their message across, we're making sure that it's much less noise for that customer for those communications. So, they're not getting a bunch of blast emails because we're trying to figure out what the right message is for them. We actually know that that person really only wants or only needs one email or maybe no email. And it's just an SMS to drive the desired behavior we want. Like that's where we get to. So as a customer, when we're able to do the things we're talking about, that experience with the brand can get better. And again, all of that circles back and it's beneficial to everybody. That's sort of my perspective on the customer experience. Are you seeing anything from your side once all these things are firing? Like, we got the consistent messaging going, we got all this. Like, what are you seeing, in the data coming back to you, just holistically about what that customer experience is like, from that perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you start, it's foundational, right? You're taking your first layer of data and you're building the segments off of those, by the customer type, and you're learning every time you create that life cycle, you've got another layer of data to compound that. And so essentially you're, creating your own audience pool, and then every time you're making it bigger and you're layering more things that are important to the strategy itself. But essentially what it does is it makes it so efficient over time. So when you're launching a campaign and you're looking at ROAS as maybe like a 7 to 1. But 6 months later, you're deploying a campaign that's very similar, and you've compounded the data so much with those segmentations that your ROAS is like 52 to 1,
Mhm.
which is what we've seen with an e-commerce client of ours, which is really fun, right? You start with the foundation, you strip away all the layers of the data, you put it all together to create the segmentation, and then every time you get more data back, you're able to relayer, and make it more complex. And essentially, you're just reducing your inefficiencies over time and making it more and more cost effective with the strategy and drawing your own customer because it's first party data. So nobody has access to this customer group, just you. So it really shows in the numbers over time.
Yeah, and we don't. I think the misconception too, because we focus on CRM and loyalty, is that we don't kind of play in the higher parts of the funnel. We do have a client where we actually drive the brand awareness advertising, but we're bringing the same principles for CRM and loyalty, the type of targeted reporting and segmentation where we can. We're bringing those same principles to that brand awareness campaign, everything we talked about lookalikes, but not just lookalikes of a broader audience, but a very specific group, and using whether it's first, second, third party, zero party if we have it, data to better shape that target audience, we're seeing success there, right? I think you just gave the example of like the down funnel, like, Google campaigns. We're seeing where our awareness ads are running. We're seeing a decrease in the cost per acquisition on a branded search versus a non-branded search. We're seeing an increase on the ROAS of those campaigns. A great sign of a good awareness campaign, right? People are searching for your brand name. Um, what what do you see in terms of, the next phase of this? And it can be, for response labs or just in general. Um, where do you see the opportunities for us and for our clients to go from here?
Yeah, I think it's funny you brought up the brand strategy client that we have because typically, you're working from down funnel up, right? You're trying to layer together and make it efficient as possible. And that client, we're really driving from the top down and we're measuring all the other things that they go into that. And so even though we have the brand strategy, we're measuring across the whole funnel with all of their partners to ensure that everything that we're doing and all the data that we're using goes across the board. So I think from that perspective, honing in on, everyone is looking in their strategy to what can they do that's unique? What can they do that can attract a customer that other people can't do? And they don't think about the fact that they have the ability to do that just because they have their own data that they could use. And a lot of times they don't know how to use it. So it's that next step is really being able to build that data across all of the clients. And what we can potentially look forward to is creating those efficiencies for our clients for some of their larger strategies, or across multiple brands with them is next steps, just that connection point that they don't have with their current partners.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm heavily into leveraging AI as a tool for us to take this data that we have, whether it's structured or unstructured. It really doesn't matter at this stage because we're building out the different methods for using it. But what AI has been able to give us in terms of insight and analysis and just architecture, if you will, to be able to connect that awareness campaign. And once we're able to identify that person, to be able to, because we have access to this client's, data on down to sales and, second orders and things like that, we're really able to paint a picture that just didn't exist. There wasn't possible
Hmm.
years ago. And it's not, I think we get hung up on like media mix and attribution. That stuff comes in time. For us, it's really being able to at least tie the thread from one end to the other. And then once we have that set, then we can start to kind of dig in and figure out, okay, well, we're seeing greater value from here versus there. But I think a lot of times we start with trying to figure out attribution with these kind of multi-channel, omni-channel campaigns because we want
Hmm.
to know what's working and what's not, want to be efficient with our dollars and all that. That's fantastic, but it's much more beneficial when that comes after you've established the thread that ties it all together. And I think we've really been successful at this approach to kind of get the pieces in place. Once they're in place, once we have the data to be able to leverage, now we can start to hone in and, whether it's doing some testing. I know we've been kicking off some tests with regards to some mid funnel campaigns recently, which is going to give us a lot of great insight into some of the audiences we're picking. But I think leveraging AI to get us there. And I think, the other thing that is on the horizon, or it's here really, is how we're able to generate more data by leaning on the media campaigns from either an acquisition or just an increase in activity or behavior from our existing customers. And that comes from that zero party data. Where are we actually able to drive our customers to provide us information? We've got really successful quizzes, for example, that have been super helpful in generating prospects and leads for our clients, but it gives us a wealth of information that we can then turn around and use. That's driven from advertising and the media ads that we're running. Preference centers, we're building those out for clients that they didn't exist before, and that just becomes an open source of what information do you want to gather, and then putting programs behind it and incentivizing filling that out. It just brings more value to everybody the brand because they learn more about the customer because we're going to communicate with them in the best way possible. And obviously for the agency partners, we're just able to offer these services out to more and more people. So that's where I see things going, to kind of look at it that way. Anything else on the future? What about your team? Like, where do you see with your team how they're evolving, with everything we just discussed?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Of course, you brought up AI because you're the data person. Looking at AI, and especially with the team, I think, there's always a way to look at the data and whether it's direct impact or indirect impact. So when you're talking about media mix modeling and attribution, what is it doing right now? What is the campaign bringing in right now? But not necessarily looking at indirect components of
Right.
that, when you're
Holistically
running.
looking at the campaign, right? Like all those
Yeah.
touch points. Yes, that was what I was referring to with that, getting that thread. Is like get the big picture there, and then we can start digging in.
Yeah, I think it's been super helpful working with the team to have AI to support kind of the analyses of when we're looking at full funnel for direct and indirect impact. And so I think that's one thing that we've kind of honed in on to be more efficient. So when we're looking at clients, we're not just looking at the last week or the last month, or really understanding the trend line and being able to analyze that data very quickly so we can move and pivot as needed. I think the other thing is, the landscape is always changing, right? So the strategy that you deploy for the next 12 months may not be the strategy that you work with. I think, one great example is like Chat GPT is offering ad space now. That's not something that we would have planned for a year ago or a year and a half ago, but being able to adapt with that. So with the team, it's looking at what we have right now, but what we can do with what we have in the future. So using AI as a component of that, but being able to build out those models and be predictive for where the landscape is going to shift and being in front of those trends. So it's really important to understand, like, if people are going to start using, a certain AI model to search for their products, are we in that space? Are we there in a paid space or an organic space? So that's really been the focus in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, and kind of bring it back. This is why we built this capability coming out of response labs. Now this information, this data, these kind of collaboration isn't going out. We have it built within, and I think we're at a point where we're seeing the the fruits of that decision, if you will, and really the value that we're able to bring to our clients when we put it out there as a capability, as a service that we offer. There's a lot of confidence behind what we're able to bring and ways that we can differentiate ourselves from other folks. We're not we're not reinventing anything here. We're not doing anything super novel. Like this is where the industry is and how things are going, and we're certainly not the farthest out ahead. But what we are is really smart people, really down to earth approaches, and a holistic thought process of the entire business. Like I think that's super key. For a lot of clients, we see more components of their business overall than the marketing team can because we work with other groups and we have access to things that, the day-to-day marketing team may not even have visibility to. So when we're sitting in that position, again, it brings a lot more to what we're able to offer and a lot more return on the investment that our partners and our clients, invest in us.
Yeah, I think it's really important too when you're working with your partners. There's so many questions you can ask about the data just to understand if you have that full cycle and if you can see it all the way through. So, what are they doing to show that attribution, to show that life cycle, and how are they using that first party data, and how are they using that to drive the strategy? Those are really important questions to have with your partner and your agencies. But something that, it's literally the core of what we do. Understanding the data and working in the data is where Response Labs was born. So it's really fun to be able to use that because you're creating your own blueprint every day.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Carie, anything else to add when we talk about media as a capability here and what we've been able to do? I feel like we've touched on a lot of it.
We have touched on a lot of it. Nothing to add for today. I'm sure we'll come back to this conversation many more times.
I'm sure we will. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and that will do it for this episode of From the Labs. Thank you.